Hello and welcome to Sex, Psychics, and Psychedelics, Discovering Inner Liberation. My name is BananaJane Garnett. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a lover of freedom, and a relentless explorer of the mind. Please come join me on my journey in hot pursuit of inner illumination and liberation. For more about me, you can find me at the BananaJane on Instagram. Now let's dive in. My next guest is Samantha Sweetwater. She's a civilization designer, a plant medicine guide, a spiritual executive coach, and a writer. She's often referred to as a wisdom carrier, priestess, regenerative systems expert, earth keeper, healer, and mama. Samantha is here to help, she's here to heal, and I'm so delighted that she's here today to share her wisdom. Samantha, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
I'm going to start with, how did you get this wonderful name?
Sweetwater?
Samantha Sweetwater, come on. Not everyone has a name like that.
Well, I was born with the name Samantha Jane Beers. I've had many names over the years. The first name that I received was Archana, which is from Baba Haridas, who was my guru. So there were years where I went by the name Archana Samantha Beers as a yoga teacher and facilitator. And Sweetwater was interesting. I had been hearing Sweetwater internally for like 8 years. And this was in my mid-30s, like early mid-30s. And
hearing like in meditation?
In meditation. Or? It was like this, it kept being present in all my intuitive listening. And I thought, at that time I was teaching yoga, and I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to name the form that I teach is Sweetwater, or maybe if I open a center, it's the Sweetwater Center. And then I was co-facilitating a retreat called the Sacred Union Awakening Retreat. It was about the inner marriage to oneself. And coming into that, my co-facilitators kind of all sat me down and they all said, we don't really think your name feels like you. I was like, okay, I'll take that in. And then it was a gorgeous retreat at Harbin. We did a lot of profound ceremony. It was not a psychedelic retreat, but we did a lot of embodiment work, and we did made these huge Vesica Pisces mandalas that were really alchemical, and worked a lot with the inner masculine and the inner feminine. And at the end of that retreat, I heard like loud and clear intuitively, your name is Sweetwater. And we were all sitting in the Harbin kitchen, and I said out loud to this was after the retreat was over, but about half of us were still there. And I said, my name is Sweetwater. And everyone just said, your name is Sweetwater, and scooped me up and took me to the pools and baptized me. Wow. So Sweetwater is I consider it a given name in a deeper meaning of what given is. It's not the name I was born with, but it's the name that was given to me by spirit, and that I've been baptized. It's the only name I've been baptized with.
Yeah, I understand, because, spirit gave me BananaJane, and so it was, I mean, what can you do? This stuff happens. Right. I've been baptized in bananas. I sometimes think, gosh, maybe I should have chosen diamond or something, because... But, it is what it is, right? These stories find us, and what a lovely name and what a lovely story. It's hard. I know it's in a way hard to present you, because I feel like you are, so unpinnable in terms of, who you are and what you do, because you're obviously someone who moves through different wisdom practices, and you're kind of always at the heart of learning and helping other people learn and grow on a spiritual level, which is kind of a hard thing to describe. But, to the person less versed in this kind of spiritual journey work, can you help us understand your journey a little?
Sure. I mean, I suppose these days also the hat that I wear is I'm a spiritual teacher who's really grounded in the pragmatics of what it would take to create a sustaining civilization, and how that chunks down to how we live with each other in community, how our spirituality is connected to the material world and to our ethical choices as parents, as leaders, as economic beings, as consumers, as creators of things and businesses. So I'm, in a lot of ways, what that means is I wear the hat often of being a leadership teacher. I run a mastermind that is a psychedelic-based mastermind that's focused on kind of a shift from being in a culture of separation to being in a culture of wholeness.
What is that? What psychedelics do you use in that program?
In that program, we work with San Pedro.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So we're going to get to that. All right. I'll try not to interrupt as you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, like my journey has been a very, it's interesting in terms of normative models of like, I did what I was supposed to do. I went to school. I figured out what degree I wanted to do. I got a job. Not my narrative.
You never did any of that stuff?
I did go to college. But I started in high school doing what I wanted to do as opposed to what I was supposed to do.
And what did you want to do?
I started locking myself in the dance studio, which was also the wrestling room of my high school. So I would lock out all the boys at lunchtime and create dances. And then I started grabbing other kids and choreographing dances about spiritual states with no names and why there is war and peace and what constitutes love and relationship. And I started doing that at 13. Yeah. And the first dance piece that I made was about war and peace and had voiceovers of Robert Frost's Fire and Ice. And
so you were just keeping it superficial at this point.
Yeah, just superficial.
Skating over the surface of things, yes.
So, one way to say that is that my life has been driven by the question of what does it mean to come home and what does it take to come home? Okay,
let's go further with that. Again, when you say come home, that has some resonance for me, but let's look at that. What does that mean to the person who's not used to that phrase?
Well, I like to throw the question back on the person because almost everyone has a narrative and also multiple narratives actually about what it means to come home. So, you want to
ask me?
Sure. What does it mean to you to come home? I'd love to ask you.
I think there's, I feel like we all carry essences and I carry the essence of who I am. It may not be a fixed position, but there are places where I find that essence. So for me, it's dancing, humor, connection, all the things that give me sort of simple bliss and joy when I'm in that, this is just for fun state, right? To me, then I'm home with myself. And then, there's that feeling of total connection, which is you cannot guarantee with other human beings, but it comes sometimes. And that sense of connection also feels like home. And then there are other aspects of home, landscapes that correspond to me with home, but it's not a single landscape. So then it gets more complicated. Right. So I guess to me, home is a feeling.
Right. Yeah, your answer really tracks with what I perceive to be kind of a deeper human truth about what home is, and that there's an internal subjective which can sometimes anchor in meditation or a sense of touching source and or the soul internally, subjectively, and there's an internal subjective that's about joy, about being fully expressed, and then there's a relational that is in people, and when we feel really like we found our tribe or we found our person or we're with our family. And then there's relation to very specific home place. What's one of the things that's been interesting when I ask people is a lot of times when people talk about their deepest wounding with home, often that actually tracks to having disruption with actual homes, like actual houses or their situation with rent or their situation with race and not feeling like there's a place where they feel like they can find their tribe, or having it to do with socioeconomic situations or with being a refugee or being an immigrant.
All the survival stuff. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And then there's another layer, which is, like you said, places that touch us.
Mm-hmm.
And different people, especially where we are on a planetary level, have different kinds of intimacy with different kinds of places. For some, there's also like a deep affinity with the planet as a whole, as a home, right? So sometimes, or the cosmos as a home. But all of those things, but one of the things I see a lot in spiritual world is that spiritual world kind of collapses into the internal subjective. So come home to yourself, come home to your soul, come home to your, to your joy and your full self-expression, but which is all great, but alone, that doesn't constitute what makes a world where we can all come home together.
Yes.
So, in some ways, I think my explorations around home have been very integral from the very beginning. Like I was asking questions like, what has you feel like you belong somewhere, which is a related question, right? This is kind of related because from your original question.
Yeah. But, no. I think it's important. Yeah.
But I suppose in some ways I'm an expert in helping people to come home, and in exploring that in a very nuanced way where we can enact that together.
I always like the "we're all just walking each other home" quote, or someone, maybe it was you on Instagram, "we're all just dancing each other home," which I choose when I remember. I choose that. Okay, so basically you've always gone deep. You're a deep diver, and it sounds like that's just, that's a place of knowing for you. You're here to go deep and to help other people do that too. I want to talk about, if there's something else on your journey that comes up, please let me know. But I definitely would love to talk with you about San Pedro, which I feel is a really wonderful medicine. And I've participated with you in ceremony and really had some wonderful moments of insight and experience with that plant that, makes me feel so in awe of it, because what I learned has really sort of stayed with me and continued to unfold. And they've been very kind of simple life lessons in a way, very sort of simple and heartfelt. But yeah, this is just me as someone who's kind of experienced it. You've really been working with this plant. So I'd like to just start really grounded with it. What is San Pedro? Where do we find it? What does it do to us?
Great. Yeah, San Pedro is a cactus. It's a tall, generally not very thorny, straight cactus. There are a lot of other species that look like it, so it's important not to just assume that all tall, thorny cacti are San Pedro.
Right. It's not that average, like regular cacti that you see all over the place in the desert.
It's actually a very common ornamental that you can often buy at Target or at Walmart.
I can't believe Target's selling plant medicine these days. That's just classic.
They have been since before anyone in America even really knew it was plant medicine, because it's a common ornamental cactus. And it's worth stating, don't assume that it is a San Pedro unless you actually know the species of it, because there are multiple varieties of cactus that look very, very similar.
Right.
But
don't start munching on random cacti.
No. Okay. And also, to be actually even clearer about that, there are species of South African, I'm forgetting the genus name right now, but there's South African plants that are like mock cactuses, and there's a couple species that actually look very much like San Pedro, and they're quite poisonous. It's actually important. It is quite important to know what it is. To be sure you know what it is.
I would say always the case. No, if you're about to dabble with plants, get clear.
So San Pedro is a tall, thorny cactus that is indigenous and endemic to Peru and Ecuador and Colombia. Yeah, it's also called Huachuma, or aguacola. And the majority of I've only heard of lineages coming out of Peru. I don't have, it's considered in some ways as a plant medicine, a bit of an orphan medicine. There's not strong remaining indigenous cultures that are sharing their ways of working with it with the West. There are teachers in Peru, but a lot of them are also very syncretic in how they teach. They're very like kind of contemporaneous as opposed to coming from very deep lineages. There's very few existing strong lineage strands with original cultures with the Peruvian or the Colombian or the Ecuadorian medicine. It is true that San Pedro was central to the Chavin dynasty, which was a 1,000-year civilization of peace that was in Peru prior to the Inca. And it's a fascinating piece of knowledge about the medicine is that it was a medicine that was actually put at the center of a long-term sustaining culture of peace as community-based practice that helped people to really stay together and be in exploration of the nature of the universe together and be in restoration of their relationships together. We don't know much about what those practices look like, but we do know that San Pedro was at the center of the Chavin dynasty.
Wow, that's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the name San Pedro it's a colonizer's name. It's a name that was given by the Jesuits to the cactus who took the medicine and received access to divinity in a way that they had not ever experienced. So they named it after Saint Peter, who has the keys to heaven. So that name is a name from, it's the colonizer's name for it, but it's a very apt name in that it speaks to how it's a gate opener to our palpable sense of divinity.
Everything I hear about it and have experienced on it just seems like the most incredible plant. And I feel it's slightly unsung compared to ayahuasca. Oh, quickly. It is or isn't mescaline? Is San Pedro mescaline?
It is mescaline. The other mescaline-containing cactus is peyote. From a cultural standpoint, from a place of reciprocity and respect, I just don't recommend that people reach towards peyote unless you're authentically invited to a ceremony being held by indigenous wisdom keepers.
Yeah, I've heard that. Is the apart? I mean, obviously that context is different, but is the experience of peyote different from the experience of San Pedro as a medicine?
To speak to the context, peyote is it's a small, slow-growing, old-growth cactus that takes a very long time to grow, and it's nearly extinct in the wild. So the indigenous are asking that white people don't work with it because they're working very hard to cultivate and perpetuate a totally endangered plant and a totally endangered culture.
Yeah. We don't have to grab every medicine. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
The experience of the two is a bit different. Like peyote is traditionally known as the grandfather. It has a very strong, clear kind of disciplining energy to it. It tends to be a bit more visionary than San Pedro. It's also more purgative. It's almost always guaranteed you will throw up on peyote. And
that helps us stay away
not always
from it,
guaranteed on.
That helps. That helps.
People call San Pedro the grandfather, but in my experience of it, it doesn't present itself. And in my conversation with it, it's not particularly interested in what gender we perceive it to be. It's very, it's a lot softer. It's actually a lot more, my teacher describes it as feminizing. And that actually is part of the Peruvian conversation about it, so the categorization of it as grandfather is generally white Americans contrasting it with ayahuasca and converging the narrative about peyote with the narrative about San Pedro, which are two very different narratives coming from two very different places and cultures.
I'm really glad you clarified this to me because it never sat right to me. I was like, this just doesn't feel like the it doesn't feel like it wants to be a counterpoint to ayahuasca. It's sort of like a moot point to ayahuasca. Like it's not, we don't need to compare and contrast and see how they work together.
Yeah. I mean, they can be very complementary as practice, in terms of an integrative practice. And there were traditions where they were used that way. Mm-hmm. But in those traditions, it wasn't called, I have no evidence that it was called grandfather in those traditions whatsoever.
Right. Okay.
So if you sit with peyote, you can understand why it is called grandfather.
Right. So it's a rougher ride. It's more authoritarian.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the ride that, I mean, I'm sure results may vary as with all these plant experiences, but overall, through these years, and from what you've learned, what do you notice about San Pedro? What are the sort of characteristics of a San Pedro experience?
San Pedro is an empathogen. So it's it in terms of the different categories of psychedelics. So psychedelic means mind manifesting. Entheogen means manifesting of divinity. And there's different categories of psychedelics or of entheogens.
And pathogen. So we've got psychedelic mind.
There's a classic psychedelic, like mushrooms are a classic psychedelic. Acid, LSD is a classic psychedelic. Yeah, it tends to be it tends to have a lot of content in terms of what you see or connect with. Empathogens are much more anchored in the feeling tone. MDMA is an empathogen. There's a common comparison between San Pedro and MDMA, but San Pedro to me is a lot more grounded than MDMA. It's a lot less buzzy, or like there's an intensity to MDMA, where your jaw hurts and you have tons of energy and you're kind of like popping out of your skin with a feeling of love and energy. But you're not always fully grounding into your own feelings and experiences. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, the distinction I use between MDMA and San Pedro is MDMA is like you're going to love everyone and everything. Like never decide that you're in love with someone on the basis of an MDMA experience, because you are of course in love with them, but you have zero discernment.
But you may also be in love with everyone else.
That's right.
Else. Yes.
Where in contrast, San Pedro is it's like empathy plus discernment. It's very deeply supports you to feel what is really in alignment and integrity for you. It's one of its characteristics that it is both an elevation of love and an amplification of discernment. And my experience is that it allows for a certain level of quiet self-sensing that is grounded in, it removes barriers to feeling your real feelings. So often, and this is true with MDMA journeys too, often where we get stuck is not in feeling too much, it's actually in being frozen from our more authentic feelings. Yeah. So San Pedro it liberates us to feel the authentic feelings and move with them and through them. And then it also, in a sense, helps you to get clear about what is really for you and what is not.
That I got a really big lesson on when I was in that ceremony with you, and I may have reported this to you, but I'll share this story. You and I had decided it would be aligned and fun to have this ceremony, and we did, and we brought together a group of women, and I didn't know the group of women, and I didn't really know you. I mean, I had a good feeling that I was following. And I'm a psychologist and I'm a big thinker, and I love stories and I love people and I love to know their stories. And I'm like, oh, all the people are coming and we're going to, find out all this stuff about each other. And I'm going to just have this amazing, rich download of experience of all these women. And I sat in circle and I took this medicine, and it completely switched off my hearing. It was like such a cosmic joke. So when each person was talking, I could see that they were talking, and I was aware that they were talking, but I couldn't hear any. I was deprived of content. I couldn't hear any of the stories. And what I could do, the only thing I could do, was actually feel them and what they were saying with my heart. So I would sometimes find myself crying or feeling super happy when one woman was talking. Again, no content, but just a sense of where she was at and either resonating or not resonating. And I remember at one point, just this one sentence came in: not everything is for you. And it was it was a little bit of it was slightly grandfathery. It was a little bit of a sort of smackdown, and in such a good way. It was like, oh, yeah. I mean, once I get over the fact that I've sort of the embarrassment that I'm so sort of rabid to know everything and be everything, very grateful for that humbling. And actually it's quite liberating. It's like, yeah, we don't have to be everything. We don't have to know everything, not everything is for everyone.
Right. I love that about San Pedro. It's very, my teacher says it's very lifey, like lifey being a non-dual adjective that also points to the fact that life isn't what you want it to be. Life is what it is. Right. So it's like, one of the prayers that we work with is like, help me to mind my own business.
Yes.
And help me to choose to be with what's for me, and also set down what's not, which is one of the great sufferings of contemporary life is the illusion that everything is for us. Some people call it the tyranny of choice. It's like we are trained to believe that all things are possible. But, in any given moment, all things aren't possible. In any given day, all things aren't possible. In any given process of parenting, all things aren't possible. It's like limits are part of...
Exactly. It's just a whole bunch of yeses and nos, right? It's like, this one's for me, this isn't for me, this is for me, right? We're just cruising through the yeses and the nos. They're all there all the time. Okay. So, right, we're getting this sense of lifiness, and I love this empathy and discernment and lifiness and being in the heart, and overall, like, not being in the head. Do you find that generally it's mostly sort of felt experience?
It's felt, and it's a shift in where your ideational process goes. I think it is more body based than it is mentally based. It's actually a medicine where if you try to get aggressively intellectual or analytical, it will often give you a horrid headache.
Right. Yeah.
But I will also say that another description of San Pedro is it's like someone just ups your aperture for attention by 2 or 3-fold. And that includes attention on your own body sensations and kind of like the magnitude of your body sensations. Sometimes it includes the visual field, not necessarily in a super psychedelic weird way, but in a amplification of like seeing the beauty of patterns and the beauty of your own eyes. Like looking at your own eyes on that medicine is so fun. Or
I need to do that. Actually, a memory just came online of a really challenging moment I had with San Pedro. This was a one-on-one experience I had with a practitioner who, had this idea and executed it. Essentially gave me a bunch of San Pedro, sat me in front of a mirror and was like, go. And he's like right behind my shoulder. I was like, oh, this is confronting. And my face is pressed up against the mirror. And I'm like, oh, I'm not in the mood. I don't want to see it. And then I'm like bargaining with the whole thing. I'm like, oh, the light's bad. That's why I'm just kind of looking shit today. And I didn't put any makeup on. And, maybe I need some Botox. And maybe I can just, that sadness in my eyes, I can just maybe I can just get rid of that somehow. I just need to not be looking here. And it was like all of these like subtle things that I might have on another day were just super amplified. And particularly this self-critical thing of like the wrinkles and aging and I was like, oh man. And then of course, you know, this is the point, I think, of being on a medicine journey and having someone else guide you. It's not about turning away. So I was stuck in this experience. And I was, as you said, sort of like the aperture of attention. You know, it was like I was really, really experiencing this thing that's kind of around a lot, but I hadn't like really gone into it. And it kind of like the whole thing started accelerating more and more and more, like this battle, this futile battle with, you know, the process of aging and, you know, not looking perfect or whatever. And I suddenly, like, as it accelerated and accelerated, I could see how sort of pointless the whole thing was. And I burst through to the other side. And suddenly I was just laughing and laughing, like belly laughing, clutching my sides and just like, oh my God, like into the humanity of it, which is like, oh, wow, of course, people, oh my God, it's so beautiful, but it's so like crazy, you know, we cling and we try and stop this massive tidal wave of experience that's happening, you know, in our lives. We try and stop our own lives and arrive somewhere, and it's so futile and it's such a joke. But it was a joke, like it was funny, and it wasn't in a mean way, you know, it was just like, oh, very lovely. It was just like, oh, people, man, we're so screwed, you know, and it was just so sweet in a way. So yeah, that was, again, a difficult experience, but super helpful. Like I remember that quite a lot, and I like it. I really like it. It shifts the attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does. It really does. And that is characteristic of an empathogen, where all of a sudden you can like cultivate this new relationship with the lifiness of it all. Like the attempts to stop aging, the upset at like little things that you can't do anything about, or the upset at big things that you thought were immovable, but it turns out like the lever is your own perspective, and all of those things are it's really a beautiful medicine for that. You know, the other thing that I work with San Pedro with really deeply that is incredible to work with on that medicine is prayer. And, you know, in a lot of ways, the pathway of prayer, there's you know, Judeo-Christian formal prayers, but in a sense, prayer is a discursive process where you're talking to the larger universe. It's like you're talking through your own God nature to the larger God nature that is the all and the everything and the one. And there's a way in which the heart frequency of San Pedro is truly the precise frequency of prayer, of amplified prayer. And Greg Braden wrote a great deal about that, and the Heart Math Institute writes a lot about that. And San Pedro is like the optimal amplifier. It also can structure community as like a microphone for that prayer, because that human listening is an amplification of divine listening. It's not because humans in a circle are an audience for someone performing a prayer. It's the opposite of performance. It's because human beings are amplifiers of the divinity that is attuning to the prayer. So I work with prayer in circle with that medicine, and that is a very, very powerful way to work with it.
Wow. Prayer in circle on San Pedro feels like the perfect antidote for our, performance-based, follower-based Instagram culture. Yes. It feels like a really good counterpoint, very healthy.
Very
so
healthy.
why is San Pedro not all the, I mean, it may be all the rage. I mean, it's the one I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. It's the one I'm like, I'm just really resonating with it. I just think I like everything I hear about this plant and everything I've experienced. Why did it not become like, is it just less because it's less of a showstopper? Like ayahuasca, you have all these crazy experiences. And I mean, is that it? Is it because it's less sort of glam bam, thank you, ma'am, do you think?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, something I haven't seen any writing about, but I haven't seen many San Pedro, like there's a lot of shamans are authentically called by their guidance. There's been a lot of ayahuasca shamans who are very authentically called by their own guidance to come to the West and share the medicine because the West desperately needs it.
Yeah.
The equivalent of that, historically speaking, over the last 25, 30 years, has not shown up around San Pedro. So like just if we look at it kind of from a cultural, a historical and anthropological standpoint, in a lot of ways, the first wave of ayahuasca coming to the West was instigated by two things, by like the Gordon Wasson who came to psilocybin, but other people like Gordon Wasson who went to Peru and experienced ayahuasca. But it was also driven by ayahuasqueros getting called and bringing their bodies and their hearts and their practices and their medicine at great risk to the West, which, recapitulates the cultural history of yoga coming to the West. There's a very similar historical narrative about how the gurus ended up coming to America. It was all through guidance and through the kick in the pants, the kind of forced assignment of their own teachers saying the West needs you, go. And being sent to America by their own teachers because the teachers could hear in collective consciousness that the West needed the medicine of yoga. So there's kind of a recapitulation of that in how the first wave of underground ayahuasca came to the West. Then additionally to that, I think there's a heck of a lot more bling to the ayahuasca experience than there is to the San Pedro experience. So there's an obvious reason there that is about it creates big experiences that generate big stories that people want to listen to. They want to listen to the positive of it. They also want to listen to the negative of it. Both are limbically triggering.
Yeah,
and have us very
stuff,
interested. Where the San Pedro story is a much more subtle and much more psychological, subtle story.
Yeah, they're humble stories.
Yeah. So on that reason, I think that's true. And then I would say the third reason is like from the vantage point of the traditions where both ayahuasca and San Pedro was worked with, ayahuasca actually was the first gate. It's the pipe cleaner. It's going to go in and do the gross work. It's going to address stuff in a way that is not subtle.
Yeah.
And it's kind of going to slam you in the face. And it's not that it always does that. It doesn't always do that. But it is much more likely to confront your deepest things head on and force you to deal with them and function kind of like as a Roto-Rooter on a soul level. Whereas San Pedro is much more about refinement. It's about choice. It's about deep self-sensing, deep self-alignment. It's about deep discernment in your field of relationships. It doesn't talk to you in the same kind of way. It does sometimes talk to you, but it's a much more subtle conversation than the conversation with ayahuasca. So for all of those reasons, there's a much more kind of in-your-face and obvious appeal to ayahuasca. And then San Pedro asks us to do much more like kind of literally at-home work. Like, how can you work with this medicine to slowly and diligently heal your relationships with your mom or with your child or with your own body, or with your ability to communicate clearly?
Yeah, that all makes so much sense. But this thing came to mind, and I don't know what you make of this. I'd love your feedback. I was in Scotland with a group of women, and it was actually a women's retreat that I had sort of pulled together in the Highlands of Scotland, and I decided to take San Pedro there. And I did, and I was in this sort of I was in this house that belonged to my uncle. And so it was sort of, I guess it was an ancestral home and it belonged to the family. Very beautiful, these wonderfully sort of curated kind of gardens. And I was in these gardens and I'd taken the medicine and it suddenly hit me. And as it hit me, I saw this tiny red mushroom on the ground. And I was like, I knew that it had a message for me. And I lay down on the ground and I listened to the mushroom. And it had, I mean, this was one of the more quote unquote trippy moments of my life. This mushroom spoke to me. It was a Scotsman. And he said, and he's really ferocious. I don't know if I can do it, but he's like, "Hey, listen up, little one. You better know that this moment is only possible because the blood of your ancestors has been spilled on this land." And I was like, okay.
Wow.
And that was it. It was like this one moment and it was a very clear point. And I was like, point taken. And I obviously really thought about that because we were having a very privileged moment of being able to swan around and enjoy this beautiful environment and, you know, think about what we want to create, and definitely not in survival, in thriving, you know. So very, very privileged. So yeah, but that was fully psychedelic, no?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful story. I love that story.
It's funny, no? But that's quite unusual, isn't it, for San Pedro to have something like that? I think there were mushrooms mixed in.
I mean, I think that those things can happen with any medicine.
Mm.
You know, on some level, that description of the expanded aperture of attention is true with all psychedelics. I mean, there's different tones to it, right? But you know, I mentioned before we started recording that I just came back from Africa and I was working with Iboga. One of the points of integration of that trip is, regardless of what medicine you're working with, we're increasing our access to the multidimensional reality of consciousness, of the ancestral realms, of the multidimensional nature of the universe and of consciousness, you know, which includes the ancestral realms. It includes the way in which that mushroom physically was rooted into mycelial intelligence, that like that same mycelium could still be living from when your ancestors died there, right? That there was some aspect of field intelligence that was fruiting in that mushroom in that moment, connected to the actual molecules of the actual blood that was spilled on that land, right? And that all is part of these layered fields that are all, you know, they all exist right on the other side of a veil, and that veil is not a physical veil, it's a psychoenergetic veil. It's the ultimate veil that we pass when we die. And that's always here. It's never not here. And so, you know, any medicine can help you access that in a right place and a right time. Like I've seen things happen with mushrooms that I would never have thought would happen with mushrooms. Mm-hmm. I thought I had categorized that as something that other medicines would do. And then you're like, well, it was the right moment and the right time for that person and their soul to experience that thing, because it's all this kind of like lock and key fabric.
Well, exactly. I was just thinking like, you know, attraction, right? You're not always necessarily going to choose the same boyfriend or girlfriend at, you know, each moment in your life. Right. We've got all these different variables in every kind of combination of, you know, people and plants. And then, yes, gosh, multidimensional consciousness. So Iboga, huh? What if? I'll just leave it there. Over to you. What do you want to tell us about Iboga?
Oh, well, Iboga is a root. It is called the wood. It's the root of a bush, of a large bush that is indigenous to Gabon and kind of moving into the Congo. It grows naturally in the jungles there. The jungles there are really the other Amazon on the planet. So they're where they have not been logged. They are intense and verdant and thick and super biodiverse. And the traditional culture that has held the medicine is the Bwiti culture. There's many, many sub-tribes in the Bwiti. It's a very large grouping of many different subsects, but the rites and the traditions of the Bwiti are they are woven with the practice of working with Iboga. So I've just come from Gabon, where I did first level women's initiation. The initiations for men and for women are different. And it was a traditional Bwiti initiation ceremony. So the ceremony is the ceremony, the medicine is the medicine. And those two things potentiate each other. And coming out of those ceremonies, one of the strong insights, I'm integrating a ton from that journey. I saw you journey into a mirror, and everyone has a different experience, but sometimes people disappear and go into other realms. I kept splitting in half and coming back together and being shown shown at my ancestors and shown other lifetimes, other beings that I've been. I've shown other things as well. And it's a medicine that works with your brain, the brain patterning with Iboga is different than other psychedelics. It's technically classified as an oneiophrenic, which is it induces REM brainwaves. So it's kind of like you're learning how to navigate the dream realms, which it turns out are real. The dream realms are, it's hard to, I don't have a language for it, but it's like a body double of this world. So you actually can go to places and other times and other places and be there, which is quite profound. It's very, very accurate medicine. It's the medicine of the soul. It reconnects you with your soul. Absolutely. And one of the insights coming out of that time and the ceremonies that I just did is the distinction between medicine and ceremony, and how truly important it is that those two things collaborate. I mean, this is something that really interests me in terms of my work in the world is there's working with psychedelics, and there's a Western process of exploring what these substances are, what these molecules do for our brains, and kind of exploring how we want to work with them. And then there's also ceremonial patterns that are ancient and contiguous with various cultures, traditional cultures over time, where the ceremonial patterns themselves have huge wisdom, both around how to work with the medicines and how to collaborate with the kinds of consciousness that the medicine unfurls, and how to collaborate with the kind of ongoing process of stewarding culture and tribe and the maturation of individuals.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah.
Is how working with psychedelics, we can come to it kind of like spiritual tourists, or also just like as a complementary practice to our healing journey as individuals. Or we could come to it as people who essentially come out of a culture that's fairly bereft of wisdom traditions, slowly learning how to like braid the ancient traditions with emergent cultures that don't yet exist, like an ancient future that is wise and thriving and beautiful, and where our soul essence is bound back into the beauty of life.
I love that. That's wonderful.
So a lot of what I'm bringing back from Africa, I'm bringing back immense respect and a deep sense that I'm a total baby when it comes to Iboga. It's very, very powerful medicine. I popped out of my body the first time I took it, and collapsed. I would say I feel very grateful for the care of the people who I was with and their wisdom and how to work with that medicine. I'm coming out of that experience with a commitment to the fabric of culture around medicines.
Beautiful.
Around psychedelics, which I was committed to already.
You were already absolutely that. But yeah, and I would love to, I'd love to see you more, and I'd love to hear you more, and I'd like to work with you more, because you are a pro and you are a natural. And I think those things, braid together deeply in your work and what you stand for. And I feel like you're really, here to help us bridge these different worlds, the ancient world and the future. And this is exciting stuff, Samantha. This is really, really good. So I don't know if you want people to find you, but where can we find you? Are we allowed to find you?
You can find me at my website. My website is samanthasweetwater.com. I'm about to do a big new platform, but that mailing list will sustain. So if anyone wants to find me, that's the best way to find me. Just sign up for my mailing list there. And if you want to leave a note that you're interested in One Life Circle is my church. And we will be starting circles again fairly soon. I'm not exactly sure what the COVID protocols for that will be, but that will be happening. And I also do masterminds called the Sacred Leadership Council. We're reconfiguring the framework for that right now, but there will be things coming up next year. And I will also be doing a training program for guides and people who want to integrate their existing training in Western psychology and or group facilitation and coaching with neo-traditional, with ancient future models that honor indigenous lineage, that anchor us in a deep knowledge of history and of the plants, and support best practice moving forward in community frameworks.
Wow. Yeah. So, please keep us posted about that. That's going to be a lot of demand, I think. I don't think you're going to be short of customers for that one. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, my dear. What Samantha left me with were some highly medicinal words and phrases. So I'm just going to say them now. Empathy and discernment, the lifeiness of life, the heart frequency of prayer amplified, the extended aperture of attention, increasing access to the multidimensional nature of consciousness, and the simple but endlessly profound expression, homecoming.